Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. Today I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Scions, Urix, and how they all got to where they are today. It's no secret that the Scions have a rather complicated and convoluted history as a species, so I wanted to untangle some of that today as I cover it, and to talk a little bit more about how all this affects them in Destiny's universe. This is one of those moments where I think it needs to be said that this is a complex topic, and we don't have all the answers to all of this yet, because the lore just isn't out there. So some of what we're talking about is gathered through what's inferred as much as what's known. So keep all of that in mind as we start talking about this most mysterious group of people. Also keep in mind that the narrators giving us context on this group of people is most certainly not going to always be reliable. You have figures such as Keitel and Callus who not only have their own agendas, but also will potentially have their own biases or opinions, or maybe even stilted perspectives of how certain events occurred. They have their beliefs that run potentially in tandem and potentially against what goes on to maybe turn out to be true or not. So keep it in mind, this is muddied by a lot of perspective. It will be a complex topic, so just keep all of that in mind as we begin. The history of any people is a history of conflict, victors, losses, and legends, such as the way with the Cabal, with humanity, and yes, with the Scions. But the Scions are in many ways completely unique in Destiny's universe. It may surprise none of you to learn that they're not a part of the Cabal main species. Surprisingly enough, the 600-pound space rhinos and the 4 to 6 foot one-eyed humanoids are not of the same species. But that distinction isn't always known, and sometimes in the past it's been speculated that they are of the same species, just of different genetic morphs, because this is a technology that the Cabal have access to. However, I figured I would go ahead and clarify that they are a different species. They are not some weird Cabal morph. They are different and distinct. This is, of course, a point at which we can raise the question of why they fight within the Cabal faction, and the answer to that is quite simply because they have to. The Cabal Empire is modelled after the Empire of Ancient Rome, and much like an ancient Roman empire had its auxiliary troops that didn't hold citizenship but still fought for the empire, the Scions of Destiny's universe are not a part of the main Cabal species, and were for the longest time slaves, not holding true Cabal citizenship. How exactly this happened is known only by inferring basic facts. The Cabal are conquerors, and it's clear that the Scions as a people were once free, but were then conquered by the Empire. Much like the many other species of the Cabal Empire before this, they were pressed into servitude, such as the Sindhu and the Clips, although some members of those species I believe were pressed into service as the last of their kind, although I'm not completely sure. I'd need to reread the old Leviathan lore. It's here that we can perhaps see the reason why the Scions were so easily able to persist within the Empire, which is simply the fact that they were clearly an asset for the Empire to use. It's here that we should mention what I'm sure you're all mostly aware of, which is that Scions are beings capable of the power of psionics. What is psionics? Glad you asked. Psionics is often inferred as the manifestation of the power of one's mind, and it's commonly seen with Scions as they manifest their powers and abilities on the battlefield, such as their uncanny precision with long-range weapons that provides them an almost preternatural sense for where their target is going to be, or the more obvious things, such as their mind blasts, the attacks that they can use by simply holding out their palm and creating a wave of repulsive force within the air, similar to the palm attacks of a warlock, or, for the flayers, their mind blasts, lightning strikes, and containment bubbles, and solar orbs. However, the psionic powers of the Scions also manifest in certain telepathic abilities. Scions often communicate not simply with speech, but by directly communicating through one's emotions and thoughts, beaming images directly into one's mind. Scions have the ability to create whole worlds within their minds, and we have lore that indicates that Scions experience some form of afterlife, where their voices go to join the chorus of all that came before them in a glorious union. It's not clear if this is true or not, but it might not be so surprising given the powers of this species. When someone is being communicated to by a Scion, it's often described as either a vivid sensation of emotion or a rich tapestry of color that conveys that emotion. Complex ideas can also be communicated in this way, including sentence structures and even some of the same kinds of deeper tone and expression that we might assign to our own speech and body language. For example, if I'm remembering my lore correctly, a vibrant palette of yellow colors beamed into one's mind is an expression of joy or happiness. So, Scions are clearly complex beings, and they're a unique species in terms of their raw capabilities. But where does this land us all in terms of their politics and the various situations that the species has found itself in? After all, if we're going to understand where they stand now as a species and all of the various storylines that will undoubtedly unpack because of them, I think we need to start with where they are and how they found themselves in this place. And so, yeah, we should talk about their history and politics. We need to go back a little bit in time to the Cabal Empire and what happened under Emperor Callus, because this is the earliest record we get. It seems clear that the Scions had a reasonably powerful empire of sorts before the Cabal conquered them, although empire might be the wrong word. It might be that they were a tier 1 civilization, in other words, they had complete control over their planet, or it might be the case that they had started to reach out into their solar system. We don't completely know. But one thing that is clear is that they had regardless built some incredible machines, marvelous pieces of technology, and chief amongst them was a source of power known as the Oxa machine. Now keep in mind, when I say that it's a source of power, I don't mean that it generated electricity or fusion energy. I mean that it was a device which granted them abilities beyond what they might otherwise expect, and that ability was the ability of foresight. The Oxa machine was apparently passed down from generation to generation, and though this prediction engine was not always accurate, the Scions clearly treasured it. This was destroyed in the Cabal conquest of the Scion people, and the Scions were enslaved by the Empire. But a Scion known as Otzot resisted and rebelled, hiding away in a more clandestine place to rebuild this prediction engine, this Oxa machine. Callus and his forces would eventually discover Otzot, who had given herself the title of Freeborn, and it's here that one action in the lore seems to indicate that conflict and strife really could be seen in the future of the Scions, and it's this strange action. You see, Callus allowed Otzot to retain her Freeborn title, and even gave her a new title as Imperial Dreamer. She was a Freeborn Scion, not a slave. And according to his own writings, suspect though they may be, Callus told us in the invitation to the Leviathan from the Destiny 2 Collector's Edition that he was on the cusp of creating a movement by which the Scions would all be emancipated. In other words, all the Scions would become freeborn. Callus was about to free all the Scions, and according to him, this is part of why I talk about unreliable authors, Otzot was supposedly jealous and was hesitant to lose her special station and rank at the cost of the elevation of her people to being equals with her. It's for this reason that supposedly she joined the conspirators of the Midnight Coup, if Callus's notes are to be believed, and remember, Callus is not always to be trusted. All of this prompts a really strange series of conflicting moments within the Scions as a people. It's really not clear if this was ever something that Otzot did. It seems very out of character in a certain sense, but maybe one can understand. It's a disgusting, selfish action that Otzot would have performed, but when you have power and are elevated above others, that power can corrupt. So maybe this happened, maybe it didn't, but either way, we moved onwards to a point where the Scions were not freed. Callus never managed to see the Scions freed and emancipated. They remained a slaved people. As a small tangent and an aside from all of this, for those of you who are screaming about the Insight Terminus in the back, yes, absolutely, the Oxa machine referenced here is most likely the same one referenced at the end of that strike, and the Otzot reference there is almost definitely the same Otzot referenced at the end of that strike too. Just so we can clear that up, because I know it'll get mentioned in the comments section. Anyway, the strange conflict within the Scions as a people that might have arisen from this moment is only made more strange when you fast forward to what happened at the fall of Torobatl and at the ascension of Empress Keitel. You see, when Keitel ascended to the throne, she announced that all Scions would be made into free citizens of the Empire. which needless to say is a good thing. And this wasn't just talk, she followed through on this. She did emancipate the Scions, who were under the rule of the Empire, as her new Imperium had begun. It was one of her first decrees. It was announced aboard her flagship as she was coronated, and as they were all, as a civilization, fleeing their home world to reunite with the legions in Sol. At best, one can interpret this as an outstretched hand and an olive branch, and an apology rolled into one. For the long-integrated Scions, it's hard to know what this would have felt like, because, yes, it is a step in the right direction, but no reparations for the destruction of the Oxa machine or their enslavement was offered here. It is the first step on a road of reconciliation, but the road is a long one, and I think this is the core reason why the Scions are not simply loyal to Keitel. But, of course, it's more complicated than that, and I think it's complicated by the actions that occurred back in the Season of Dawn. It's at this point that I think we should make small mention of that, and of course of the Season of the Worthy too. Long story short, in the Season of Dawn, the Sundial was raided by 3 Scion Flayers. Scion Flayers are powerful Scions that have in some way or another ascended to another tier of their evolution. They have much more powerful psionics and are physically larger too. More importantly, they were able to take the Sundial and use it to gaze into the potential futures that they might be able to access. And when they saw that, they were working to find a future in which the Red Legion was successful and the Scions were dominant. This is also a moment at which they looked into the past, so that they could rob humanity and any of the defenders that might rise against them in the future of their advantages. In particular, they were going after the Traveller and our Light. This was an imminent threat and we did shut it down. All 3 of the main Flayer sisters were killed. I believe their names were Oslect, Nirul, and Tazarok. But there was a 4th sister. Her name was Amtek. Amtek witnessed the joining of all those 3 psionic siblings, the elder sisters, and as that was occurring, not only did their final gambit begin, which also failed, but Amtek was empowered with a desire for vengeance. This is the little-known reason why the Almighty, the Cabal's star-killing machine, was dropped in the direction of the last city, and why it nearly dropped on top of us. This was all done at the behest and at the plan of Amtek. The plan failed, and it's honestly not clear if Amtek is alive or dead. I've always assumed that she's alive, because the live event where the Almighty did crash, and luckily was diverted off course by Rasputin, was in fact called the Sisters' Revenge, or words to that effect. And I've always assumed as a result that Amtek is alive, but regardless, her actions continued to inspire others. And this is the point at which I want to drop us into Vox Obscura. This is kind of where that next moment in the story is really opened up, and it's the moment at which we see the actions of another Scion, Yurix, who kind of follows in Amtek's path. It's at this point I'm going to go ahead and just play that dialogue, but also I want you to listen to the second bit of dialogue that I'm also going to drop in there, which is also from the 3rd week of Vox Obscura. Both of these moments have really important points that they reveal about the nature of the Scions. Go ahead and take a listen to this.
Empress, you said Yurix was behind the attempt on my life. But why?
Yurix is motivated by the notion of a unified Scion nation, free to develop their full potential. She believes the Flayers nearly accomplished that with the Sundial, until you killed them. This message shows some sort of Scion ritual. No. A religious ceremony. It's in the far past, so distant, before their assimilation into the Cabal. The feeling is difficult to describe, but I know it well. Something like militant nostalgia. The ritual leader, an elder, is speaking about how the spark of divinity exists in all of us. how we are unified beyond death. An eternal chorus. It's peaceful. And utter nonsense. Those beliefs were brutally subjugated by the Scions themselves long before we conquered them. Yurix clearly wishes to stir a sense of forgotten psionic unity under the banners of Callus and the Black Fleet.
Okay, so with all of that said, the history of the Scions is very complicated, but you can kind of understand why there is a division in their unity now. Go ahead and acknowledge for a second that Commander Zavala is the figurehead they believe is responsible for murdering the Scion Flayers at the Sundial, and everything starts to level and make sense. Personal as their motives may end up seeming, this is the real reason why the Scion Conclave, formed by Yurix, is now going after everyone in the tower who has worked with the Vanguard, and in particular its leaders, namely Commander Zavala, and I presume if they could get the chance, Ikora Rey, although Zavala is a far more front-facing leader, whilst Ikora is a lot more clandestine, so it's less likely that they would know about her and her true impact on the situation, even though it might actually be greater than they realize. This is the interesting thing about a spy master. You never truly can know their impact on a situation. Combining all the lore that we know about the Conclave from the Captain's Log and the Palindrome lore tab, we can say that it's very clear that Scions hold the idea of liberation as a very strong one, but liberation isn't all that they want. They want a unified Scion nation, and this has led them to some very interesting choices. I think if the Scions are truly pursuing their own interests, there is no perfect partner. Whilst Keitel has offered them freeborn status within the Empire, this is still the Empire that has enslaved them, and it's an empire that they may well resent. I certainly couldn't blame them if they did. More so than that, it also allied itself with us, the Vanguard, the Tower, the ones that killed the Four Flayers, and so there's a very obvious notion there. And then we come to the strange alliance that they've chosen to form, which is the other obvious choice aside from rooting for themselves and becoming truly independent, and that's to root with Callus. Callus of all people allying with the Scions in a strange, twisted way might make some degree of sense if he was telling the truth about wanting to make all the Scions freeborn. He would essentially be kind of offering them the same thing, but without having murdered those that led them. And then there's the really strange question, which I think has to be asked, which is, do the Scions know what they're getting into by allying with the Pyramids? Do they understand what the Witness wants, what it does, and why Callus is bound to its will? And do they know for sure if they will be able to form an independent Scion nation when this time has passed? The thing is, I don't know if we have any answers to any of those questions. This is all a very open-ended area, and it makes me really curious to know about the deeper lore behind the reasons for why the Scions allied themselves with Callus in this instance. I say the Scions here, and I think it's worth making the clearer generalization, which I hope is also obvious from the game. Not all the Scions are sided with Yurix and Callus. There are still loyal Scions in the employ of Keitel. Whilst they are a well-connected species, and whilst there are defectors that have been leaving Keitel's ranks thanks to the psionic propaganda of Yurix, there are still some Scions that are incredibly faithful and clearly will still operate within the Ascendancy's ranks. A few other interesting points, which leads me to something about Yurix generally, is this idea that they may have a very selective view of their history. The first reason I want to say that is because of the fact that they allied themselves with Callus. Now, I don't know if this is the case, but it might be possible that Callus was the one who originally incorporated the Scions into the Empire. There was a large degree of conquest under his reign, and I know that that was most certainly the case for the Sindhu and the Clips. I do not know if that is the case with the Scions. I do not believe it is confirmed anywhere with the lore. If it is the case, then this alliance is a strange one at least. I have to presume that that isn't the case, but even so, he isn't the emperor that technically gave them freeborn status, even if he did discuss it. He also makes this claim, and it's a dubious one that could only have been made to us if he so desired. So maybe this is just another twist on history. If none of the Scions knew about this, it's entirely possible that they're deciding to go at the side of someone who would enslave them if they were easily returned to the seat of power in the Imperium of the Cabal. So it's an odd choice, to say the very least, but maybe there's something we don't know about the Scions and their relationship with the Black Fleet. However, this isn't the only point at which Euryx seems to have a very selective view of history, and that's demonstrated best, I think, by, well, that second quote that we played a little while ago from Vox Obscura 3, the quote about how there was this militant nostalgia for these times at which the Scions used to have these beliefs about how there was a shard of divinity in all of them, and how they could all be unified. It's a pretty message, and it certainly does render the correct feelings and emotions that one would need in such propaganda. Here's the thing, I think Euryx knows that, and I think Euryx is very deliberately choosing that moment. We can't confirm what Keitel said about the idea that the Scions themselves suppressed such beliefs, but if they did, wow, that is... I mean, Euryx is a terrifyingly smart political operator, because a real propagandist for anything to do with politics will understand it's not necessarily about fact, it's a lot more about feelings, and Euryx is able to bend the context of history in order to win her people over in this instance quite clearly. Defections from Keitel's ranks have been rising, and this is a moment at which the propaganda is clearly working, even if we can continuously shut down their operations. It does also make me wonder if Euryx has fallen into the strange position where she has been captured by her own propaganda. If that's the case, then maybe she genuinely has drunk her own Kool-Aid, as one might say, and has indeed made it to the point where she genuinely believes that there was once this ideal version of a Scion society where everyone was free and where there was this spark of divinity. And she's just ignoring the fact that her people suppressed violently that same belief. Again, all of this is also relying on our account from Keitel being correct, because, to be brutally honest, we also don't know if it's actually the case that the Scions brutally suppressed this ideal within their own society. We just don't know. In this instance, Keitel might be an unreliable narrator. It fits her own perspective and her own interests, but it's also history that's clearly been relayed to her by another Scion. It has to have been by their own experience, and so we just don't know if that's true or not. I think if there's one thing that I've hopefully displayed from all of this, it's that the Scions are a really complex people, and right now their political situation is a very strange one. I don't know if they can be influenced. Euryx, by the very definition of her being a leader of a people versed in psionic power, yeah, she has got to be very strong-willed. But also, the Scions are a people that I think are open to changing their mind and to thoughts. It most certainly happened when Kinzig eventually ended up trusting Catabases aboard the Glycon. If you look at some of the examples of the lore from this season, you can see moments where the Scions trusted members of the Cabal, such as Keitel's emissary that she sent to the tower even though he ended up dying, and certain other Scions, I believe, that run around the tower in the lore and actually do assist us, including one that I'm going to be covering very soon in a lore tab of a certain exotic weapon that indicates certain characters may be returning. The whole point of all of this is to say, the Scions aren't completely spoken for. We do have a major faction of them to worry about, but I think if there is any possibility of them being swayed, it's something that's reasonably worth looking at. And hopefully this helps you to understand a lot more of the context behind Vox Obscura and why all of this is so powerful, why it's so important. The Scions are a big deal, not just to the Cabal, but to the entire face of the war between light and dark that's happening within the Sol system. If they, as a whole, can be swayed one way or another, that dramatically shifts the balance of power and gives an asymmetric advantage that is quite potent. So yeah, keep an eye on this storyline. It is almost definitely going to come up in a future season. In fact, I would not be surprised if it is the focus of a future season in the main plot. I expect us to see Scion bosses, I expect us to at some point encounter Euryx and maybe make her change her mind. If Amtek is still alive, I believe that she will have a role to play in all of this. There is still so much that we haven't seen yet, and I just implore you to keep it all in mind. Hopefully you now understand all of this a lot better. But either way, that is our video for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, go ahead and leave a like, and of course, if you have any more commentary and thoughts of your own, the comments section down below is open for you. Of course, if you want more content, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Per audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.